thank you very much and welcome. Like I said, like Annalene explained already, so we will focus on the unique challenges faced by non-Syrian refugees, including Iraqi, Yemeni, Somali, and Sudanese, who are the focus of the study. And we will start with a short presentation, followed by a discussion to gather your feedback. Let me also quickly take this opportunity to introduce both Aya and Hassan, who along with other researchers conducted interviews with the non-Syrian participants and have played a very important role in the project. I'll let Aya and Hassan very quickly introduce themselves. Aya and Hassan.
Okay, I'll go. Hi, everyone. My name is Aya, and I've long worked on non-Syrian refugees. Hassan and I are mainly volunteers and researchers in a local-based organization called Sawiyan that works with different non-Syrian communities.
And hi, everyone. My name is Hassan Abdullah, and I'm from Somalia. And currently, I'm volunteering with an organization called Sawiyan. And mainly, we are working with non-Syrian refugees, especially the Somalis and Sudanese, and partly the Yemenis. So I was part of this research find throughout the 1.5 year, and this research has been conducted within these communities. So I will be part of this focus group discussion and this breakout room discussion today. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Hassan and Aya. We do have some time, so and we have fewer participants. So what I'll suggest is that very quickly we just get the name and the position and organization of each of you who are in this breakout room today. Perhaps maybe we could begin with you, Linnea. Sorry for putting you in a spot, but thank you for joining.
Yes, no, fine. I think I already gave the introduction. I'm Linnea. I'm with the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Yes, thank you, Linnea. Could I just call your names as I see them on the screen? So Lama Ibrahim, could I request you to quickly introduce?
Yes, hello all. This is Lama Ibrahim from Meki. I'm Education Officer. Thank you.
Is that the Middle East Children's?
Yes, right.
All right. Thank you so much. And Meg?
Yeah, hi, my name is Meg, and I am the Country Project Manager for IOCC.
Could you also say what is IOCC for everyone's benefit?
Yeah, absolutely.
At least sure, that gives a good idea.
It's the International Orthodox Christian Charities.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Meg. And then Caroline Zulo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline. I am the advocacy coordinator for the Jordan INGO Forum, the GIF, and a member of the One Refugee Approach Working Group.
Wonderful. Nice to have you here. And Catherine?
Hello, my name is Catherine. I work for Caritas Germany, but I'm integrated in the Office of Caritas Jordan, our partner organization in Amman. And I'm a project advisor for humanitarian assistance. Sorry.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. And Florian? We can't hear you, Florian. Maybe Dina, you could introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Dina Baslan. I am the co-director of Sawiyan, and I am the proud colleague of Aya and Hassan. I want to commend their very hard work for this research, and I look forward to this discussion.
Florian, can you unmute yourself now? Are you able to unmute yourself? Maybe he's facing some issue. Let me introduce Florian. Florian is from GIZ, and he works on financial sector development and has been supporting BMZ also on financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons. So I'm happy that he's joining this breakout group, trying to understand a bit more about this segment that we see is quite excluded in the entire humanitarian response in Jordan. So welcome, thank you, and please allow me some time together with Aya and Hassan to present some of our findings, and then we'll get into more discussion and feedback. So as I mentioned already, next slide, Aya. Yeah, as I mentioned already, since the number of non-Syrian refugees is quite small, at about 87,000 refugees from these nationalities are registered in at UNHCR. Due to these small numbers and low political support, there has been very little attention on the deteriorating situation of this segment by the international community. They are not included in the Jordan response plan, which guides a lot of the humanitarian work in the country, and hence they are sort of lower in this hierarchy of humanitarian support. Most of the donor funding also is directed towards this, what we call the Syrian crisis. Non-Syrians, we use that as an umbrella term, but as we started this research, we realized that each of these nationalities, refugees from each of these nationalities, have a very different context and they face different unique challenges. So we'll like to spend a little bit time on to understand this. Some of you who work with them already understand this, but just for the benefit of the larger audience. So first on the Iraqis, we see that our Iraqi participants who arrived in Jordan between 2014, 2015, that's the segment we focused on. So they belong to the religious minorities of Christians and Mandaeans. And they live in areas closer to the church. Most of them have applied for immigration visa to Australia through private sponsorship route, where they have relatives who could sponsor their visa. And due to religious differences, they're not integrated at all. And also, this entire idea that Jordan is supposed to only be a transit country for them affects their integration. Aya would take over on the Yemeni bit.
Thank you, Swati. Just to be clear, I was probably supposed to say that in my introduction. So I'm going to be partially in this presentation focusing on the Yemenis, because I along another colleague, mainly conducted interviews with Yemeni refugees. So just to say very briefly that Yemenis in Jordan arrived in across many different waves to Jordan, which has majorly affected how widespread they are across the country. And there's a very high presence of migrant workers in different governorates across the country. So there's often this confused identity about their presence or their status in the country, which significantly affects their coordination as a community and what they know about each other, since they are mainly widespread across the country. I think one of the very prominent findings of this research that we found is that the level of awareness within the Yemeni community about the different processes of registering with UNHCR and other kind of aid, access to aid, has been the lowest among them as a community in the country as a whole, and not just in Amman. There's also a noticeable delay in the recognition of Yemeni asylum seekers as refugees. So it takes quite a few years for them to have RSD interviews, and of course the very slow processes of resettlement for those even who hold recognized refugee certificates.
Over to Hassan. Hassan would like to speak a little bit more about Sudanese and Somalis. I prefer that he speaks and Aya speaks because you work so closely with these communities.
Yeah, thank you, Swati and Aya. And I will be taking you a small journey with the Sudanese and the Somalis who are part of this research and the uniqueness of the challenges that these two communities are facing. And for the Sudanese, they are less integrated due to racial discrimination and lack of awareness among host population, but there is high solidarity within the Sudanese community. In 2015, Sudanese staged protests in front of UNHCR office, after which there were mass deportations. They have been viewed as a notorious community since then, security clearances which are required for work permits have become risky. And for Somalis, the most important thing that I want to mention is that with only 700 Somalis, they are mostly concentrated in Jabal Amman, a neighborhood of Amman. Due to the language constraints, they are closely knit community. But this also results in isolation, poor networks, and low integration, especially for women. They also face high racial discrimination and low awareness among Jordanians. Their ID issue is complicated, as many of them came on Yemeni or Sudanese passports by human traffickers, but are registered with UNHCR and as Somalis. Many shared how they live hidden lives, avoiding any kind of interaction with Jordanian authorities. And this is the most important issue, and that the Somali refugees here in Jordan are struggling. And as you know, Somalis and Jordan is the second country of asylum. Majority are from Yemen, and they have been there for more than 20 years after the collapse of the central government in Somalia in the early 1990s. So they are in the second country of asylum, and they came using either Yemeni or Sudanese passports. So this dual citizenship causes them challenge of documentation challenges and challenge of access to financial institutions and access to dealing with employers or whatever related. So this is something that is very tricky or very challenging for the Somali community. And thank you. I hand over to Swati.
Yes, thanks Hassan for sharing all of those insights. So, I mean, as we see, apart from this, as we understand this context, let's understand also that non-Syrian refugees, all of them have access, for them, the biggest issue is accessing the labor market and work permits. Unlike Syrians, access to labor market and work permits has not been eased for them. And we shared earlier this example of Abbas in my first presentation, showing this very high cost of work permits. So even if it's technically possible, the cost of work permits is really unaffordable. And that's really not the only issue. We see also many cases of deportations, especially since 2019, when Yemeni or Sudanese refugees went to apply for these work permits, but they were during the security clearances, they were actually given orders to be deported back to their home countries. And there is also this fear that refugees must choose between either having a work contract, that is to be technically a migrant worker, or remain an asylum seeker registered with UNHCR. So both of these two things are not possible. That's what we learn from our participants. And this might be actually more than just a fear. They told us how they are informed by the Ministry of Interior that they must choose between these two legal statuses. But at the same time, there is no formal written communication about this. And even next slide, Aya. An even bigger challenge actually is that they're not able to control their future. As discussed earlier in the first session, waiting for resettlement and without any pathway to stay, refugees are not able to invest in building any skills. And this greatly affects their mental health. Not having a clear idea of future affects also their decisions today. As a participant explained, if the UNHCR calls me and gives me a final decision that my file is rejected, I will decide to go back home. I don't believe I can do something in this country. And this will be the end of my journey here in Jordan. But in most cases, people just keep waiting to hear the actual decision on their resettlement files for many years at a stretch. Next slide, Aya. And other challenges follow closely from this. We spoke already about discrimination, low integration, isolation of women, and also deteriorating mental health, especially for men. Non-Syrian refugees at the same time also do not have opportunity for training and capacity building, as most seats are reserved for Syrians. Other big challenge is the registration ban from January 2019, practically barring recognition of non-Syrian refugees as asylum seekers as refugees, and this leaves them without access to health, education, protection, and cash assistance in the country. There are also frequent changes in the policies regarding access to health and education, and this we saw how it results in a lot of confusion and ultimately affects access to these services. So the policy changes are happening very frequently from the government's standpoint. Overall, we see that there is lack of clarity on the UNHCR procedures, especially on resettlement application status. So many participants actually shared how they keep calling UNHCR and keep spending money on traveling back and forth to UNHCR office without receiving a certain answer. And this is reflected well in the case of Abbas. I'll let you share the story of Abbas. You'll have to unmute yourself, yeah.
Thank you. I'm not used to the sharing screen and talking and the audio, so I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna mainly summarize Abbas's story here, which we think is quite significant. So previously we spoke about a Yemeni participant called Abbas, who was required to pay $4,700 to issue his work permit. Abbas arrived to Jordan in 2017, and he lived in a very industrial area near Amman called Sahab, which is known to host a lot of migrant workers and other refugee populations, including from Yemen. His situation deteriorated starting from 2019 because he faced a lot of issues with having his RSD interview to be recognized as a refugee for resettlement, and of course obtaining monthly cash assistance from UNHCR. He had no option but to start illegally working in Jordan to be able to support himself and his wife. And to also be able to support his family, which is around 8 members in Yemen. Abbas's challenges in Jordan were quite a few, so I'm going to try to tackle a couple of them, including mainly in his interviews, he really did note how he struggled to find very accurate information about the UNHCR processes, whether it's about registering and recognizing and obtaining a refugee certificate and his recognition, as well as the resettlement opportunities and also regular aid opportunities. He mainly relied on his Yemeni and Syrian networks within Sahab and on social media, which majorly affected his life decisions. He also pointed out in the 3 rounds of interviews his struggle to obtain residency and the high cost of overstay fines, which need to be paid to be able to both issue a work permit and also leave the country. So even if he decided at some point, or we wanted to decide at some point to leave the country, he had to pay his overstay fines, which is a JD&a for every day he's residing in the country illegally. The income he earned was barely enough to support himself, and the work opportunities in Jordan, job opportunities in Jordan have been declining for the past few years. This of course led him to make very decisive decisions about his life, and decided that his wife needs to go back to Yemen while he remained in Jordan and lived with a group of single men. He constantly mentioned in his interviews that he had a very high fear of being detained while working illegally. And specifically in round 3 of the interviews, he said that he was working in a storage room in a shop so that no one sees him working basically illegally. He also mentioned that his cousin had applied for a work permit and was deported back to Yemen after he did submit an application for his work permit. He also mentioned that he heard the stories of other Yemenis who were deported back to Yemen after submitting applications to obtain work permits. Abbas mentioned throughout the 3 rounds of interviews that he wished that he had more clarity about what his rights are and what he is allowed to do as a refugee, for better support just in general in the country, for legal residency and work in Jordan. He also mentioned that he wished to be trained as a barber and learn English language, which would help him in life opportunities in general and in resettlement if he gets that opportunity. He also mentioned that he wished that he used his experience in Jordan in installing solar panels, which is something that he was quite experienced in Yemen. He was one of the very few non-Syrian refugees who had planned, who had a consistent plan B throughout the interviews. And his plan was mainly to go to Turkey, and from Turkey then try to find ways to move to Greece. His wife returned back to Yemen, as I mentioned, and after the third interview, which was after his wife had moved back and he'd submitted his work application, work permit application, he said that he finally went to Turkey. And from there, he tried to walk to Greece, which took him around 7 days, but he had to return to the city that he was living in Turkey due to injuring his feet. He attempted to make the same journey again, but couldn't due to a gang attack on the borders between Turkey and Greece. And finally, he made it to Greece via the sea route. And he sought asylum upon his approval to one of Greece's islands. Luckily, after 20 days of arriving to Greece, he received his RSD interview and also received an approval on his refugee claim. He spent about a month in a refugee camp and received a residency permit. And he is supposed to receive actually his official refugee document, which is the blue passport, within the next few weeks, sometime in July. With that, he will be able, he hopes to be able to travel and work somewhere else in Europe, since the job opportunities in Greece are very limited.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Aya. Aya just spoke to Abbas day before yesterday, and we were really, I mean, it has been a difficult journey for him, but I'm happy to hear at least that he was successful with his asylum application in Greece. And I really hope that he's able to achieve the kind of economic integration that he's looking for, like many other participants in this research. It's just that he took the risk away, this deadly journey of, moving to another country to look for better economic opportunities. Most of the others stay back in Jordan, waiting years and years in this dilemma. Should I wait, or should I go back, or should I move to another country? And most people are stuck in this limbo in Jordan without legal rights to work and without a future, without a certain future. However, we did see that despite all of these challenges, it's worth looking at some who were able to make some of those respondents who were able to achieve certain success, and we saw, and it's not a success in a linear fashion. Like, they're able to make most of whatever they have and still able to build their livelihoods and diversify their incomes, all of that happening mostly informally, of course, without work permits. And we saw that what helped was higher education, opportunities to build skills through education training, on-the-job training, which was quite important. Also through social networks, which were important to find work opportunities, especially with Jordanians and with migrants in the country. What helped was also work opportunities in general, especially with NGOs, which not only helped them expand their networks, but also made them more aware about refugee rights. And lastly, language, which was very important. And of course, English was important, but even we saw some Sudanese refugees who adapted to the Jordanian dialect, and that helped them integrate better and find better work opportunities.
Okay, so I think, considering all of what's been said, there are very prominent recommendations that are worth mentioning here, which mainly is, of course, for the government of Jordan to halt the registration ban on all non-Syrian refugees, which has been active since 2019. And also, I think something that's probably very realistic and achievable, is to have more, for the government of Jordan to provide a clearer policy on all the rights of refugees in terms of the processes of registering with UNHCR and their eligibility for both refugee status and work permits, including the costs in terms of overstay fines, and of course easing that process to them. And for UNHCR is to have more transparent communication channels with all refugee populations on what is lawful and what are they capable of obtaining in terms of documentation and work documentation specifically, and what is not, because it's something that I think is shared between all these non-Syrian refugee populations, is their inability to clearly communicate with UNHCR, and that's because of a lot of reasons, including UNHCR's communication with the government of Jordan on what is allowed to these populations in specific and what is not. Secondly, the digital tracking of the UNHCR application, and for refugee populations to be able to access their personal information about these files, whether how close they are from their RSD interviews. As mentioned, for non-Syrian refugees, it takes quite some time, which is a few years, for them to reach their refugee status determination interviews. And of course, their assistance, whether it's monthly, whether it's annually, it's something that most of our participants have actually shared as a big struggle. And of course, resettlement to third countries. Finally, I think is counseling for rejected refugees and resettlement applicants on alternative options that they can seek, whether in Jordan for better integration and work opportunities, or abroad in terms of migration.
Next slide, Aya. Yeah. Hassan, you can go ahead.
And in this section, I will highlight some of the recommendations we suggest for INGOs, NGOs, and CBOs. And for the donors and NGOs, and we suggest as a recommendation to include non-Syrian refugees in the Jordan response plan. And this is where the most important point comes for non-Syrian refugees. As you all know, and non-Syrians are excluded in the Jordan response plan. So we, as people from the communities we are talking about, and as refugees, and we deal with different organizations regarding to how they respond or how they support refugees. So things are originating from whether their response is included in the Jordan response plan or not, which communities to support based on what nationality, or is this something and planned only for responding to Syrian crisis here in Jordan. And the second thing is provide them with more skill building opportunities, especially language trainings. There was a feedback, and to make language training longer, some Somali women had received CUN training, but they could not do anything with it, and they had no market and skills or capital. And again, Somalia is one of the Arab League countries, but majority of the Somali refugees here in Jordan face language and barriers when they are communicating with organizations, with and local community members. So their challenge affected in building networks around this community or accessing services available for refugees in this country. So one of our recommendations that we would like to see happen is to emphasize more on language trainings, which gives members of this community, for example, a training in the Arabic language, which they don't speak, and even expanding to other languages like English. And the other thing is that supporting community-driven and faith organizations. There are, within these communities, there are initiatives and driven by members from these communities, whether they are community representatives, or whether it is faith-based organizations which are closer to the ground, ideally run by refugees. So these things catch less attention from donors and international NGOs. So this, during our research, we found out how important these community-driven initiatives are important in responding to some of the and challenging issues to these communities. And in the next part for local NGOs and CBOs, and I think they need to create awareness about non-Syrian refugees among government and non-government duty bearers, including Jordanians, police and local authorities and employers. And the other thing we could recommend for NGOs and CBOs is that, and among refugees, they create awareness about legal rights and availability of aid opportunities. And during our find research, we found out that many people from these communities are not aware of or don't have enough information about the aid opportunities around them. And due to different reasons, for example, in the Somali context, they said that they cannot even make direct communication with organizations who make this, who provide this kind of services to these communities. And the other thing we found out is, and we would like to recommend to NGOs and CBOs to change, is to create awareness about legal rights, what people have and their basic rights and where they can go in case they need a legal intervention. And the last point is that to offer and coordinate referral pathways for vulnerable and communities. These NGOs or CBOs can create a structured system of making referrals and of vulnerable communities to organizations and who can provide the necessary services they need. And then the next part is that I want to talk about the complicated matter is to find ways to improve longer-term perspectives for non-Syrian refugees. One is training to build transferable skills for what they can use when they resettle or migrate or return to home countries. And what we see is that mostly the NGOs, donors, or international organizations focus on livelihood and something that is based on the short term of these refugees. But we would like to see the organizations or donors interfering in this section, and where refugees are given the chance to build a transferable skills that they can use when they get resettlement in a third country, or even if they are repatriated back to their home countries, or even if they can get if they can migrate to other countries by different means. Since resettlement or return is not an option for most of the people in these communities, it's critical to look at the barriers to skill-based migration to third countries. And I myself, I am a Somali refugee. I have been in this country for the last 10 years. I am a graduate from one of the most reputed engineering schools in Jordan University of Science and Technology. And I have been trying to somehow integrate in the local market of work and the local job in this country. But I faced, and I still continue to face, the same challenge. And in 2017, I registered myself in a platform and run by an organization called Talent Beyond Boundaries, who find refugees with talents and make the connection between employers in other countries like Canada, Australia, or other European countries, where these people can use the skilled hands of these refugees for those. And again, and after having registered my name, it's almost now for 4 years. And the challenge is that only few have got a chance to get an alternative pathway of resettlement through this program, because one of the requirements of the employers in the outside world is a job experience. And if I go to the Jordanian job market, and I'm not allowed to get a job, so I cannot gain any kind of experience. To the UNHCR side, I am considered just as a single man and who can do everything in this country. So my case is not prioritized for any resettlement option. So in this regard, I would encourage that the young people who have skills, but still need to improve their language skills, to improve their previous experiences in the fields of engineering or whatever they learn, need again to have any form of system that supports them, whether it is the initiative supported by organizations like Talent Beyond Boundary or anyone who can do something in that regard. There is a need for those who don't have an option for resettlement based on the criteria and that is followed now in by UNHCR or any resettlement supporting an organization. There is a need for creating more space for complementary pathways or alternative pathways for resettlement for this, or alternative ways of integrating these refugees in this country.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hassan. Yeah, that's a very important point, and Hassan shared his personal experience. And in a moment, we'll wrap up, and we would really like to hear from all of you what you think about some of these very sort of policy and high-level programmatic recommendations. But before that, just very quickly, I'll take you through some of the other recommendations. One thing that really stood out was actually networks. And we saw that across nationalities, how networks played a very important role for people to access opportunities and to build their even access to financial resources. For instance, we saw that those who could build good relationships with landlords and these corner shops, grocery stores could access a line of credit during a crisis. So we have some recommendations around it. Especially, I would like to highlight, as Hassan already pointed out, language trainings, but then also more immersive opportunities where non-Syrian refugees could work in official settings, and they could be attached to Jordanian entrepreneurs, or they could receive apprenticeships or mentorship opportunities, and then also to support collective action groups where refugees themselves could collaborate and form these mutual support groups, which is not allowed legally at this moment in Jordan. Next slide, Aya. And another one is on the support that community-driven and faith-based organizations could offer. And we have Meg here, and would love to hear from Meg more on this. And we heard quite a lot about these certain churches, like Church at the Second Circle, and they played a very important. Some Sudanese participants even called it the Sudanese Church, because they received a lot of support, aid, assistance, health services, and even social networking opportunities and language trainings from this church. And unlike other humanitarian programs, the support they offered was irrespective of nationalities. It was really need-based and responsive to the needs on the ground, and they could really hear the needs of the not the beneficiaries, but they call them members, the members that they supported. And we were thinking what could be the other ways to support some of these faith-based organizations in terms of ensuring that they have enough funding, which is not tied in a traditional way to certain outcomes, but rather flexible to respond to the needs of refugees on the ground. And same goes for community-driven organizations like Savia. Dina already introduced her organization. And once this happens, such organizations could take a broader role. Like they could also be responsible for cataloging services, because there are so many humanitarian assistance available and so much confusion around information. They could also offer referral pathways, for instance, for vulnerable cases. All of this is done informally, but perhaps this could be part of their formal programs and funded by donors and INGOs. Last but not the least, as we think about more of these recommendations, I would like to reiterate that in order to help refugees achieve the outcomes that they want to achieve, it's important that a right-based approach is followed, where we first address the issues at the foundational level, especially for this group that we are discussing here, and ensure that refugees are constructed as right holders and not as beneficiaries of programs. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. We took a bit longer sharing all these experiences, but we would now like to open the floor for some of your feedback. We have a couple of questions to guide our discussion, and we would like to spend some time on each of them.